In in following stories, be it political, which everything really is, whether it's the entertainment industry or actual politics or sports, local, national, it's all politics. Um, the story, Martina Navratilova comes up. And it's interesting that Martina Navratilova comes up or came up in 2013 with, within conversation of and with Jeremy Kilpatrick in that disgustingly cat litter box smelling. Then the next layer, who the hell knows what it was after I cleaned the first layer of odor from the basement apartment of 1555 Washington Street in Denver. Um, and Martina Navratilova came up in the conversation. Can't remember why. I remember talking about or her but she's coming up again now. And I think it has to do with, again, I have direct connections, as in, I was buried under a lot of stories that were taking place in that time era. And this Judy Nelson, I think, a person who was buried underneath Martina Navratilova's probably many personas and political and sports career, and who knows what else. Um, and as I'm was looking at photos of Martina Navratilova and person Judy Nelson, who I never really paid attention to either one of them at the time. But when I look at photos of Judy Nelson story within my own life at that time era, because I'm like looking at these photos of this Judy Nelson person, I'm like, looks has familiar face, almost looks like my daughter Jennifer facially. However, and so I started to think, gosh, is this like an age reveal, an actual chronological age reveal party that has evolved into today what is called a rave or a gender reveal party, or and from what I understand, in these days, there's two types of gender reveal parties, and I used to always assume that it had to do with like a baby shower, and when you're pregnant and they have a, oh, we're having a girl kind of thing. But it also is about a transgender where a party is had. It's like a party where transgenders reveal their actual or their original gender among non-transgender people in their life. And so in looking at these photos of Martina Navratilova and Judy Nelson, there's evidently some issue as to whether Martina Navratilova was a transgender, because she was very robotic. I remember like a little. It was never talked about or mentioned that that I can remember that, or like it was never on the news and it, within the news stories. Martina Navratilova's controversial presence in the sports arena of professional tennis had to do with her lesbianism. And then later, there were whispers here and there that Martina Tulova might have actually been a transgender male to female, and the controversy of the advantage that a male to female person would have had in terms of of uh, and it's not a liked subject because of the male versus female, men against boys against girls issue that's been why such a big deal was made about traditional roles, because it really didn't have to do with a non-transgender female's opposition, or I should say it possibly didn't really have anything to do with a non-transgender female's opposition or question as far as women physically competing against men in any arena of physical activity. However, that actually being a cover story to keep the American public's attention from the fact, first of all, that there actually is, or at least was, I think the line is becoming, because of evolution and the number of transgender operations being conducted, the process that has taken place, whereby today there might be less difference between a non-transgender female and a non-transgender male's physical ability. But I think even back then there was. Or to say that there wasn't, and there never was, a difference between male and female physical capabilities is an arrogant thing for anyone to say, and has more to do with them trying to cover up their unethical activities. And I'm not necessarily talking about a transgender or operation. I'm more talking about the reason a person had a transgender operation, or the fact that they were holding someone in a relationship that the other someone didn't want to be in, but the other someone was actually a hooker that the popular person was holding. And so it goes very deep when you really to see how things have been done. So this Judy Nelson person, possibly her story needs to be told and hasn't been told yet. And I can't really speak for her, but I can speak for, like I said, a sub my life at the time. Martina Tulova was, I would say, more enjoying, because it would have been the late 70s, early 80s. And Martina Navratilova, if my memory serves me correctly, her popularity and her success on the tennis court was during like the early 70s, when I was a little girl. And now this subplot sort of relationship that was not part of my life in my early high school years. But this Judy Nelson, when I look at photos of Judy Nelson, who was the significant other of Martina Navratilova. Facially, Judy Nelson resembles, like I said, she could almost, facially, she has a likeness to my first daughter, Jennifer. And just a little bit fuller, but as an older person, I don't want to get into that too much because I don't want to send my mind into another angle or plot or whatever. But the relationship that I can see within as a spawning off of the Judy Nelson Martina Navratilova relationship is a girl from my early high school, middle school years who went by the name Beth Denicola. I have no idea who Beth or how old Beth Denicola was, but the guys used to call her Fish, and it went along with how they labeled her as she was a female who was considered loose, and they didn't outright call her a slut, but the expression was, if it smells like fish, it's a dish. If it smells like cologne, leave it alone. And I never understood that at the time, and I really thought it was kind of like I understood it at a certain level. It wasn't an expression. It wasn't anything I wanted to become a part of. And I remember feeling sorry for Beth Denicola regardless of what her activities were, because I could, even at that age, see the emotional pain in her eyes, like her hurt feelings. But also she has a resemblance to Bob Herzog. And ironically, Martina Navratilova has a facial likeness to someone named Scott Herzog, who has a likeness to a guy who I worked with at Super Thrift in Georgetown, Delaware, when my first daughter was a little girl. And he and I had become friends. And he seemed like a really upstanding kind of like Jewish personality. Again, race card, that's the type of personality that he had. Is that a stereotypical way for me to look at him? I didn't look at him as that back then. And I hadn't formed any stereotypical things. I'm referring to how I see now how he was looked at, how he was seen. In other words, I can see what other people's stereotypical things, and I'm not backpedaling. But he also has a resemblance to one of those guys in that boy band, which I can't think of the name of, because I'm just realizing the likeness right now. Richard Althea, I think, was his last name, and he and I worked together. But there's a facial likeness to him and Martina Navratilova. So is it true that when a transgender person has a transgender operation, first of all, I'm assuming at this point I know that Martina Navratilova may very well be a transgender person. Either that or um, or did she have her eggs donated? There's a whole lot of question that comes up when all of these likenesses from your past start churning and they start bubbling up from the wherever they originated. And so the fact that Martina Navratilova has a likeness to this Richard person from Super Thrift Co-Employment, and that Judy Nelson has a facial likeness to, and also to Scott Herzog, who was a boyfriend of one of my best friends in from high school. And to recognize a likeness of Bob Herzog, it gets very confusing, but that is the purpose of the name game. The name game is for the purpose of keeping things confused and issues and stories and all that stuff buried in the annals and in the fat cells of youth today. And I've already talked about that. Don't spoon feed my children your politics or your unethical behaviors. You're getting kind of frail and your skin's getting kind of flaky. And I don't mean that as an insult as much as your physical being is deteriorating. And you should probably begin to allow some youth to live and exist instead of continually trying to maintain a physical being within a very old, or instead of trying to maintain some kind, and it's because it's as though they know that Jesus exists. And I my tendency is to apologize, but I really don't have to. I don't have to apologize for bringing my Christian existence. This is weird because this suddenly now is looking like a one-dimensional, like almost as though. So I'm going to walk through this doorway just to show, because I don't want it to look like I'm like in front of a screen or anything. So the relationship and the personalities that come within the relationship as sort of Judy Nelson and Martina Navratilova again, Oppenheimer comes in because to me, Martina Navratilova looks like she could be Jeremy Kilpatrick, who to me looks like he could be in some photos, not in all the photos of Oppenheimer, but particularly one which is like a portrait style photo, and one where he's sitting at a table with Einstein. Other photos don't look like as close to Jeremy Kilpatrick as those two specific ones. If nothing else, the conversation about and bringing forward the information of the same people having almost like a gridlock on banking and on like patent, anything that involves money, anything that involves the upper echelon hierarchy of finances, and the gridlock that certain people, regardless of what their perceived or stereotypical or presented as in publicized cultural connections, religious connections, or identification. It's the same people. It's the same facial characteristics that have held a gridlock on politics and sports and so they've had, the same people have had an advantage by way of that that avenue being the followed avenue, the historically what is the expression? The historically followed path of their generations before, and then becomes obvious as to why those accreditations become a demand, and that we have to keep mentioning Einstein each and every time we talk about physics, even if we are beyond on Einstein's both in actual physical world conditions, and in like seriously Einstein over it, right? Because the fact that to give so much accreditation again and again and again and again to the same person, as though no one else existed in conversation, in the conversations. He did not accomplish or publish all that work on his own. Osmotic information is real. It's so to accredit the same person again and again and again feeds into the hierarchical system that's been in place and not allowed anyone else to, or certain populations, what feels to me like blonde hair, blue eyed bimbos such as myself, and it really has more to do with intellectual jealousy and financial control, and having the same lineage accredited, be it Einstein's lineage or Oppenheimer's lineage um, gosh, I can't think, Plato, or way back to Galileo and Michelangelo and all of them, for the same accreditation to be given to William Shakespeare. It's like, get over your and allow other people to exist and live without living under the whip and chain of the people who won't let go of the need to claim everyone's existence, pretty much. And then the finger comes pointing back at me again. Because the table's always, and as far as I know, I've never made it into the arena of being heard as a non-transgender female, which is what I am, non-transgender heterosexual female. And in fact, I feel as though unless a woman has rolled over and given in to homosexual politics, that we're not heard. We're kept. And yes, I had planned to be a stay-at-home mother. I hadn't really planned. I had planned myself to have a career and be married to my children's father. And to have it all. But then once I had my daughter, I quickly realized that it's not a reality. It isn't a reality for a woman to have it all, career and happy children, without all the jealousy networks, and without affecting our children's lives in a negative manner. And I said to my niece recently, as in 2016 or 17, whatever spring, summer that was, where I stayed at my brother's house at 2910 Ruskin Court for a very um that it's important to realize that when the neighbors and the media, depending on your level of existence, um, notice that you're having personal issues, that the reason things get out of hand is because the neighbors find that as an opportunity to start uh, gnawing away at your family and your what you have established for yourself and your children. Your your life becomes fodder for the less advantaged, or those looking for more placement or whatever. It's to realize that your neighbors, new neighbors moving in, hey, we they it again becomes a cultural issue where you're when you see problems in your own personal life, you become the fodder of other cultures. And to realize that before you start making fodder of someone else's life because they're having issues that were created possibly by other people. For instance, if this female over here was paid to go into your house and start a relationship with your wife or husband while you were gone off to work, or if these practiced generationally child trafficking people went into your child's school and said, "Hey, I'm such and such as," uh, and had the connections or the money to go in and say, and call your child out of school and take your and have your child somewhere, which I believe is one of the things that happened to me. Um, you know, it's not so funny when the shoe is on the other foot, and it's not as fun, and the gossip isn't as juicy. Um, so I think here I just want to send a warning, not as in a warning personally from me, as the because I don't want to have any part of it, the system that I see so clearly how things have been conducted and how and what events purposefully destroyed my life, as I'm trying to regather and get my children back to my biological children back into my life. I don't want to become a part of the ripping apart of someone else's life, and particularly not via their children. Um, and I've stated that many times. Um, so these stories that spawn off or have spawned off from these bigger stories as in what's the stories that have made it to, because they're just so famous. And please note again, my intention is not my drive is not fame, and it's not even fortune, except for I am making every effort to stake claim on what I have been denied as far as finances go, and what it certainly looks like many other people knew about long before I even had a suspicion. There's a distressing situation going on right now, which I can't identify where it's coming from. And as I woke up this morning from my sleep, there was a lot of door slamming, which there is pretty much every morning and every night, and some nights it goes on all night long. And while it's going on, I to make an effort to go out into the hallway to see what it's all about. And I don't feel a fear. It's not a fear, but yet it stays like this morning when I woke up and felt very disoriented, very groggy minded. And then I took Tylenol. But it feels like one of those situations where my psyche is being contained in a much older person's mind. Like I feel older than I actually am right now. Like I feel like I'm 90, whereby my psyche has been transferred into Gene F. Henderson II psyche again. And if you're high enough on the in the know kind of mystical world of remote viewing and military strategies and sweeping things under the carpet strategies and whatnot, and burying the guilt of the much older generations in the younger generations, and how they do all that. And then comes into my conscious thinking the expression that Christians have used regarding open doors and open windows. And God, I'm going to quote as closely, and I have no idea who it first came from. I don't know if it's an actual verse in the Bible, but I'm certain one of those Christians who have read the Bible front and back and back to front several times over, knows for certain. But the expression is when God closes a door, he opens a window, or he opens a window and closes a door, or opens a door and closes a window, whatever the exact expression is, I don't know. But I I definitely see how the Christians who really overly appreciated the verse John 3:16, for God so loved the world he gave his only begotten son. Key verses in Harvard politics, Harvard Yale skull politics. When I say skull, the skulls are the secret society, which I think is associated with the Zulu network. And when you start to see these connections, you realize the level of savage and violent behavior. Flying at you as the race card, because I made the connection, and I realize and I can see uh now, why do I not talk about the secret societies of like Oxford? Because Oxford, that I have not found any negative. I would imagine if there were, that the skulls would be looking for, not necessarily on my behalf, but the skulls would be looking for a diversion, like let's show her something else, because she's getting really close to disassembling our secret society that has had such a stronghold in, I want to say, Colorado. It feels like, for so many possibly centuries. um Oxford was is where I think was picked up, as in by proxy, when I was younger. In other words, I Oxford by way of my choices and my conservative presentation, um, both in my views and my ideals. So, wait, while we're trying to reconnect, I'm just going to keep speaking through where it says your connection is unstable. Please wait while we try reconnecting. Um, because of my, in other words, I didn't realize at the time in my youth where that I was picked up by Oxford because of my presentation of a more conservative existence, much more conservative than I know that I was also picked up by the Air Force. I know because of um, phenomena that I experienced that Harvard doesn't like for me to realize. because it's empowerment, both in a higher level of intellectual existence and more a level of, and more on a frequency level that my intellect and physiological mental existence is comfortable on. I don't like being pulled into subterranean frequencies. Because it's physiologically painful. Um, and I've talked about that many times before. Um, and therefore, I know and am well aware that my children, my biological offspring, I say offspring because I like spring, and I have a feeling that the expression offspring has something to do with people's subconscious thinking about about visceral biological parental connections to our own biological children. Therefore, I use the expression offspring when I'm speaking about my biological children. Um, and therefore, I know my children, my biological children, are more comfortable physiologically, as in cerebrally, to a higher frequency, higher altitudinally, because again, I know that different frequencies, different levels of communication are also they occur at different altitudes. And when I speak about subterranean communication levels, it's usually like, I don't want to go into it all because I just don't feel like the intellectual tennis match with Jeremy Kilpatrick and others who are constantly trying to disprove my intellectual capability. Now, I am 58 years old, and as I've stated, my biological children I know are more intelligent than I am because it's the way Jesus created us. He granted us children knowing that our children are more intelligent than us. That's part of the purpose. And it's also part of the purpose that my children were taken from me, because when you have, in other words, there's an acknowledgement within the Mensa society, or whatever it's called. There's an acknowledgement that isn't talked about purposefully, because the upper echelons who have had power for all the through the ages don't want us biological maternals to realize that part of the reason they took our children was to contain us in our historical place, which to me, as I've talked about before, I find myself and my second daughter standing in a corner in the Renaissance paintings as a child, with my nose to the corner and looking over my shoulder at the punishing person with tears in my eyes, as though I'm being overly punished or persecuted. And I want out of that corner. And I find it questionable, the logo of the Masons with the G in the corner. Of the compass and square. I want my children, I need and want and am demanding my children to be released from the corner. And my grandchildren.